He thought the wolf he saved as a baby had vanished into the wild forever. 5 years later, under live news cameras, that same wolf walked out of the forest and called his name. He never planned to become anyone's hero. Not at 27, not standing ankle-deep in freezing river water beneath a mountain sky the color of steel. Ethan Cole had come to Colorado to escape people, not to save them, or anything else alive. But life had a cruel sense of direction, and the night he found the wolf pup was the night everything changed. The storm had broken 3 hours earlier, tearing across the valley with brutal winds that dragged winter back into spring. Needles of snow stung Ethan's face as he trudged home, boots crunching across the soaked trail, breath clouding the air ahead of him. His jacket, old army issue, hung heavy on his shoulders, the fabric soaked through. He didn't care. Nights like this numbed everything, the memories, the noise, the guilt he never spoke about. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he thought at first it was the wind running along the canyon walls. But the second time, Ethan stopped walking. Somewhere ahead, barely loud enough to exist, came a whimper, thin, desperate, and lonely. He swore under his breath. He wasn't in the mood to play rescuer. Colorado forests were brutal on anything unprepared. Coyotes. Eagles. Freezing rivers. Nature showed no mercy. Ethan listened again. Another whimper. His flashlight beam shook in his hand as he lifted it. "Hello," he called, voice echoing through the darkness. Ridiculous question. What did he expect a person to answer? He followed the sound anyway. Across broken branches, around fallen logs, right to the river's edge where a giant pine leaned dangerously over rushing water. The swollen river roared beneath it, dark and violent, white foam smashing against boulders. And there, beneath the lowest branches, was a shape. Something small. Something alive. Something trying to lift its head. Ethan stepped closer. The beam of his flashlight slid across matted gray fur, too small to be a dog, too wild to belong to humans. A wolf pup. 6 weeks old at most. The pup lay half-submerged on a narrow strip of wet sand, body shivering uncontrollably. Its front paw was twisted beneath a fallen branch, trapped. Every jerk of its body sent water spraying. Those eyes, wide amber pools, fixed on Ethan with raw panic. For a moment, Ethan froze. Wolves brought trouble. He knew that better than most. The ranchers in town hated them, said they killed cattle, ruined livelihoods. The wildlife officers tracked them constantly. Anyone caught interfering risked fines or worse. "Walk away," his brain ordered. "Leave it. Let nature decide." But then the pup's trembling grew weaker, breath rasping thin and shallow, and Ethan saw something he couldn't ignore, claw marks dug into the mud behind it. The tiny wolf had crawled through the storm, dragging itself toward the water, away from something else, something bigger. A predator. A mother gone. A pack lost. Ethan felt a fist clench around the center of his chest. He knew the feeling of being left behind by those who were supposed to protect you. Before he understood what he was doing, he dropped to his knees and shoved the heavy branch aside. The pup yelped but didn't fight. Too weak. Too scared. It weighed almost nothing when he lifted it from the ground, its fur soaking his shirt instantly. That close, he could hear the strangled rattling in its lungs, borderline pneumonia, maybe worse. "You're dying," he whispered. "I'm not letting you die." He pressed the bundle of fur against his chest and stood, staring across the raging river. His cabin was nearly 2 miles away. He'd have to run. The pup whimpered, breath fluttering. And Ethan ran. Through snow so cold it burned his legs, over uneven trails, lungs screaming. He held the wolf tight beneath his jacket, shielding it from sleet and wind. Halfway home, the pup's breathing slowed. Then stopped. "No," Ethan gasped, stumbling to his knees. "Not now. Not yet." He tilted the pup backward and pressed his fingers against its tiny chest, massaging hard, whispering nonsense encouragement between frantic breaths. The pup jerked violently, coughing up river water, gasping once, then again, and Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. By the time he reached his cabin, he could barely feel his hands. The room was dark, silent except for the storm battering the windows. He kicked the door shut, slammed wood into the fireplace, and lit flame after flame, desperate to warm the shivering life in his arms. The pup lay motionless on a pile of blankets, fur still dripping, chest rattling. Ethan dragged towels from the closet and began drying him, whispering, come on, stay with me," over and over. He heated broth, spoon-fed drops into the tiny mouth. The pup's tongue flicked weakly, tasting life. Hours passed. Storms faded. At sunrise, the wolf pup finally opened its eyes. Not terrified. Curious. Hopeful. Ethan reached out, expecting the animal to shrink back. Instead, the pup pressed its head against his palm. The gesture wrecked him. "This isn't good," he muttered. "I can't keep you." But even as he said it, he knew he would. He wrapped the pup in his jacket, carried him close to the fire, and whispered, "Until you're strong enough to live. I'll be here." Outside, dawn spilled gold across the snow. Ethan had no idea that saving this wolf would shape the next 5 years of his life, that he would name the pup Shadow, raise him to adulthood, lose him to the wild, and then, on national television, Shadow would find him again. Not as a cub, but as a full-grown wolf. A predator that remembered the man who saved his life. And in 5 years, the whole world would watch what happened next. The river carried the smell of pine and snowmelt as Ethan Burke pushed deeper into the Montana forest, unaware that something behind him was following every step he took. 2 days had passed since he saved the baby wolf from the collapsed ravine, 2 days since he wrapped the tiny shaking body in his jacket and carried it through freezing rain to the small cabin he used during research expeditions. Ethan was a wildlife biologist, trained to remain objective. But nothing about this situation felt objective anymore. The cub, now eating, breathing, and sleeping beside his fireplace, had begun to stir emotions he could barely name. That morning, Ethan left his cabin before dawn, hoping distance would help him think rationally. His boots broke through patches of frost as the rising sun painted the treetops gold. He should never have brought a wolf pup into his care. Every textbook warned about imprinting, dependence, and the unnatural attachments that form between humans and wild predators. He needed to contact someone from the conservation department, arrange transport to a rehabilitation center, do things the official way. But every time Ethan even imagined handing the cub over, something twisted painfully inside his ribs. And the cub seemed to feel the same. Back at the cabin, the little wolf would whimper at the door whenever Ethan stepped outside, paws scraping helplessly against the wood. Ethan told himself it was hunger, or fear, or instinct, not attachment. But no amount of logic could erase the way the cub pressed its tiny muzzle under Ethan's chin whenever he held it, searching for warmth the way newborn wolves search for their mother's heartbeat. He rubbed tiredness from his eyes as he reached the ridge overlooking the valley. Snow still clung to the north-facing slopes even in late spring. In the distance stood the dark line of mountains separating the wilderness research zone from local hunting territory. Somewhere out there was the pup's pack, if they were even still alive. Ethan didn't know. The marks he found scratched into ravine rock, boot prints, blood, spent rifle casings, told a grim story. Poachers had been moving through this area again. Illegal hunters who didn't care about laws or ecosystems, only trophies and money. That ravine might not have collapsed by accident. Someone could have triggered it while trying to kill the pack. That thought returned every hour. The cub may have lost everything. Ethan sat on a fallen log and stared at the endless sea of trees. He had always believed science held answers, that objectivity protected him from emotional mistakes. But last night, while feeding the cub warmed goat's milk from a syringe, it opened its tiny silver eyes and looked straight at him. Not through him, not around him, into him. And suddenly, Ethan understood what it meant to be responsible for another life. He pulled his notebook out of his pack, intending to document the cub's growth and behavior patterns, but paused. Inside the cabin, next to the cub's bedding, lay his jacket, torn and chewed to threads. The wolf pup had dragged every piece of fabric that smelled like Ethan into its nest. That wasn't random behavior. That was imprint recognition. A sound broke through Ethan's thoughts, soft, rapid footsteps on forest debris. He turned sharply, breath held. Nothing. Just wind moving through branches. He stood anyway, muscles tense. The cub had followed him yesterday too. Barely able to run more than a few meters without stumbling, it tracked him through the woods until he finally gave in and lifted it into his arms. Today, Ethan had left quickly and silently, hoping the pup would stay asleep. Something rustled behind a spruce tree. Ethan held still. His pulse jumped. Then a flash of grey. The wolf pup tumbled out from under the branches and face planted into damp moss, tail wagging so hard its whole back half shook. Ethan exhaled in frustration and relief. "You're unbelievable," he muttered. The cub chirped, scrambled upright, and launched toward him, tiny paws slapping mud, oversized ears flapping with every clumsy leap. When it reached Ethan's feet, it collapsed against his boot, panting from the exhausting chase it had just completed. Ethan knelt and scooped the cub into his arms. It licked a streak of mud off his wrist before curling into the warm space beneath his jacket. Ethan didn't return to the cabin immediately. He stood there holding the wolf, heart thundering with something new and terrifying, attachment. It would be easier if the pup feared him, easier if it acted like a wild animal. But instead, its breathing slowed to a peaceful rhythm against his ribs. That rhythm reached into memories Ethan had spent years burying. 5 years ago, his younger brother Caleb had died in a climbing accident. Ethan had been the one who brought him to these forests, the one who ignited his fascination with wildlife. Caleb was only 19. He died before he could finish college, before he could publish research, before he truly lived. Ethan had never forgiven himself. He joined conservation work to hide from guilt, not because he was noble, but because he was lost. Now this tiny wolf pup, with ribs like twigs and eyes still too big for its head, was forcing Ethan to feel again. He whispered, "I should hand you over to the professionals." The cub pushed its forehead against his jaw. Ethan's breath broke. He sat on the log again, holding the wolf close, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. The forest had fallen silent around them. Even the wind seemed to listen. Hours later, Ethan returned to the cabin. He placed the pup on its bedding and stirred the fire back to life. The cub hobbled to the hearth, lying so close to the flames that Ethan had to scoot it backward twice. With every small correction, the cub responded, not with fear, but trust. He set aside dinner for himself, canned beans with salt and pepper, but paused before taking a bite. The cub was staring. Its tail swept the floor twice in anticipation. "You're not supposed to eat human food," he sighed. The cub stared harder. Ethan scooped a little bean mash with his finger and held it out. The pup licked it clean. Tail wagging. Eyes shining. Ethan laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Caleb died. Later that night, a distant howl rolled across the mountains. Not one howl, many. Deep voices, adult wolves, calling. The cub's ears twitched. Its head lifted. It stared at the cabin door and whimpered. Ethan froze. A pack searching for their missing pup? Could something so miraculous be real? Another howl answered. Closer. The wolf pup pressed against Ethan's leg, trembling violently, not in excitement, but fear. Ethan's hand dropped protectively over its tiny body. The pup wasn't ready to return to the wild. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Ethan understood that now. Outside, in the cold dark forest, enormous shadows moved between trees, wolves circling his cabin. Searching. Sniffing. Growling. And Ethan knew one truth as he locked the door. Saving this cub wasn't over. It had just begun. The first winter storm of the season arrived 3 weeks after Elias brought the wolf pup home. Snow fell in thick, stubborn sheets that buried the pines and muted every sound on the mountain, turning the world white and breathless. Inside the cabin, heat from the stone fireplace glowed across the wooden floor, casting orange shapes that flickered against the walls. Outside, nature raged. Inside, there was only quiet breathing, Elias in his worn leather chair, and the tiny grey pup curled beneath a flannel blanket beside him. He had named him Ash for the color of his fur, and for the way he had risen from near death like something reborn from fire. The wolf pup no longer cried through the night. Instead, he slept pressed tightly against Elias' leg, his breathing slow, trusting. That trust terrified Elias more than any storm outside. He had not intended to love this animal. He had not intended to let him into the house, let alone into his chest like a second heartbeat. But now, as Ash stretched and laid his head across Elias' boot, the man felt something he had not felt since his wife and child died: purpose. Ash required him. Ash needed him. Ash was alive because of him. Elias leaned forward, resting a calloused hand gently against the pup's back. He could feel every fragile rib. "You're getting stronger," he murmured. The wolf stirred, eyes opening. They were no longer dull and lifeless. They were golden. Alert. Curious. That look nearly undid Elias. For a moment he saw his daughter's eyes, bright with early morning excitement as she used to climb into his lap beside the fireplace. The memory stabbed him, but he didn't push it away. He had finally learned that pain and love share the same roots, they grow together, no matter how much you try to starve them. Ash yawned, jaw widening into a silent little snarl that revealed teeth just beginning to sharpen. Elias chuckled softly. "You think you're fierce now? Give it time." And time passed. Days blurred into weeks. Storms came and went. Snow thickened its white armor across the world, and the wolf pup learned to walk steadily, then to run. Elias built tunnels and pathways through the deep snow outside so Ash could explore safely. He watched the wolf stumble through drifts, tail wagging, occasionally tumbling face first into soft powder, then emerging triumphant as if he had conquered something colossal. Ash's legs grew longer. His ears sharpened upward. His body gained weight and strength. Elias fed him raw venison, careful portions, slowly replacing the emergency goat's milk he had used at first. He researched endlessly, feeding cycles, wolf vocalizations, developmental psychology, the point at which wolves begin to test boundaries. Every new skill Ash learned made Elias proud and scared. At night, he would sit in his armchair staring into the fire, listening to Ash breathing on the rug beside him, and he would whisper to the flames, "You're not staying here forever. You don't belong to me." The wind outside would howl back. Ash began to howl soon after. The first sound was small, almost pitiful, a soft, rising whine that broke off halfway. Elias froze at the sound, heart pounding. Ash had never made a noise like it before. The pup looked startled by himself, ears twitching. "Do it again," Elias whispered. And the wolf did. This time longer, clearer, more wolf than pup. The mountain echoed back. Ash lifted his head higher, body vibrating with the instinct of something older than civilization. Elias watched him, eyes stinging. He knew what the sound meant. Nature was calling him. The wild was whispering his name. Still, he could not send him away, or not yet. Ash was family now. Family. The word alone changed the temperature in the room. Just as the pup grew, so did the question stalking Elias' mind. How long could he keep a wolf? Would releasing Ash kill him? Would keeping him kill his spirit? Was love reason enough to break nature's laws? One night near mid-January, Elias and Ash sat on the cabin porch wrapped in thick moonlight. Stars scattered across the sky like sparks from a dying fire. The world was silent, too silent. Wolves normally hunted this time of year, even far off in the deeper forest. But tonight the air held nothing but stillness. Ash sat beside him, no longer small enough to fit beneath Elias' flannel blanket. His shoulders were broader, his fur thicker, his gaze more focused. Elias reached down to scratch behind his ears, and Ash leaned into the touch. Moments like that were dangerous. Moments like that made him forget who Ash really was. The wolf tilted his head upward and released another howl, this one long, beautiful, filled with something ancient. And this time, from miles away, another wolf answered. Ash froze. His body shifted forward, every muscle alert. Elias' chest tightened. This was the beginning. This was the line he couldn't stop Ash from crossing. He whispered, "Not tonight," and pulled Ash gently close. The wolf obeyed. Not out of fear, but love. That night, Elias dreamed of the forest calling Ash away. Dreamed of paw prints disappearing into snow. Dreamed of waiting by the door for a wolf who would never return. He woke choking on tears. For the next month, as winter began to loosen its grip, Elias trained Ash carefully, teaching him to stalk, to hide, to listen to distant movements. He took him farther into the woods each week, letting him learn scent trails, safe water sources, routes home. Ash excelled at everything. Sometimes Elias watched him moving through the trees, so silent he made the forest seem clumsy, and he wondered whether the wolf even needed him anymore. But every time Ash disappeared into brush, he always came back. Always. Always with that same chirping, excited sound. A greeting only meant for Elias. And every time he returned, Elias knew. The day Ash wouldn't come back was getting closer. And it would kill him. Then, on a morning painted with the first green wind of spring, the sanctuary called. They had space. They had a pack. They wanted Ash. Elias stared at the phone in his hand for nearly a full minute before hanging up without speaking. He walked outside and found Ash standing beside the tree line, staring into the forest as if waiting for an invisible signal. "You hear something?" Elias asked. Ash didn't look back. The wild was speaking again. Elias swallowed. Soon. Very soon. And when the time came, he had to let him go. Even if it destroyed him. The forest around Jacob Carter had never looked more alive than it did that spring morning, 5 years before the world would learn the truth. Back then, Jacob was not the man the world would see on television. He wasn't famous, and he certainly wasn't a symbol of compassion. He was simply a young wildlife ranger working the mountains of Montana, responsible for patrol routes that most men avoided and dangers most people underestimated. It was on one of those early patrols that a storm rolled in without warning, thunder collapsing across the sky, lightning cracking through the clouds, wind slamming through the pines like something alive. Jacob had been checking wolf activity near a den site documented earlier that month, tracking prints in the mud and studying claw marks along the bark. Everything suggested a pack lived close, and he knew better than to intrude. But the storm hit sooner than it should have. He hurried toward the valley base, planning to find shelter under rock formations where the wind couldn't reach him. Then, over the roar of rain, he heard something small, sharp, desperate. A tiny cry carried through the wind, so faint he didn't know if he imagined it. He turned, listening harder, holding his breath. There it was again, a whimper, high-pitched, fragile, filled with panic. Jacob followed the sound, pushing through wet undergrowth until he saw movement up ahead, a collapsed tree, roots torn from the soil, the trunk cracked down the center. In the hollow space created beneath that fallen giant, Jacob saw fur. It was tiny, trembling, soaked through with rain, eyes squeezed shut in pain. A wolf pup. It was no older than 7 or 8 weeks. Small enough to fit in his hands. Young enough that its milk teeth had barely emerged. Its ribs showed through its soaked fur, quivering with every terrified breath. And worse, the pup's front leg was pinned beneath the fallen trunk. Jacob dropped to his knees, ignoring the mud soaking his clothes, ignoring the thunder rolling above. The storm might have knocked the tree down, but something else was wrong. Wolf pups did not wander alone. Where was the pack? Where was the mother? Jacob tried to lift the trunk enough to free the pup. It moved, but only slightly. The tree was too heavy. He tried again, rain sliding into his eyes, fingers slipping against bark. This time, he used his shoulder for leverage, pushing with every ounce of strength he had left. He felt a pop in his back, pain ripping through muscle, and the tree rolled just enough. The wolf pup scrambled free, dragging its injured leg behind it. The little creature collapsed right into Jacob's lap, pressing against the warmth of his chest as if it had known him forever. He expected it to bite, to snarl, to react with fear, but instead, the pup whimpered in exhausted relief. Jacob looked down at the creature, lightning reflecting in its silver-grey fur, and felt something lock into place inside him. He knew the rules. Leave wildlife alone. Never interfere with a natural order. Do not remove an animal from its environment unless human activity caused harm. But that was the truth, wasn't it? Human interference had done this. Tracks in the mud told the story, hunters. The den had been disturbed by illegal trappers. The pack had fled, abandoning the pup during the chaos. The ranger inside Jacob said, "Report it, document it, walk away." But the human inside him? The human could not. He wrapped the pup inside his jacket, shielding it from freezing rain. The tiny body vibrated with shivers. The pup's heartbeat was so faint that Jacob feared it might stop at any moment. He whispered to it, not words, but steady sounds, letting the creature know it wasn't alone. When the pup opened its eyes, Jacob saw something impossible for such a young animal: trust. He hiked through mud and hail, through the raging storm, every step aching from the strain of carrying the pup and battling the storm. His truck was nearly 2 miles away. Twice he slipped and fell, shielding the wolf with his own body. By the time he reached the truck, he was shaking as badly as the pup. At the ranger station veterinary ward, the on-duty medic took one look at the injured pup and swore under her breath. "If you'd been 10 minutes later," she said, examining the crushed leg, "this little thing would be dead." Jacob didn't respond. He just watched as they worked, cleaning the wound, stitching torn flesh, warming the body with heated blankets, and placing tiny fur tubes beneath fragile skin. Every time the pup whimpered, Jacob flinched. The medic asked the question every ranger dreaded, "Did you see the pack?" Jacob shook his head. "Then it's alone," she replied softly. "And wolves don't survive alone." That night, Jacob sat beside the recovery table long after his shift ended. The station lights dimmed around him. He listened to the pup breathing slowly, steadily, now safe from rain and hunger. Wolves were supposed to be wild. They belonged to mountains and rivers, not to men. But Jacob had never believed humans and wolves were meant to be enemies. Since childhood, he had felt a connection to them, a respect. Saving this pup felt less like a choice and more like destiny. Around midnight, the little wolf woke. Its eyes opened fully for the first time, revealing an icy blue stare that seemed far older than its fragile body. The pup tried to stand, yelped from pain, then pressed its head into Jacob's arm. Not to beg, not to fear, but to bond. Jacob whispered, "You're going to live," and felt the truth of it deep in his bones. The station vet said the pup needed 24-hour feeding and temperature regulation. Too risky to send it to a rescue center in this condition. Someone would have to care for it through the night. Jacob didn't hesitate. He slid the tiny wolf into his flannel shirt, near his heartbeat. The pup curled into his warmth and fell asleep instantly. He named him Shadow. Outside, snow fell across the mountain range, silent, indifferent, eternal. But inside the ranger station, beneath the dim yellow light, a new bond formed. One that would defy science, instinct, and every rule Jacob had sworn to follow. Neither of them knew that years later, this same wolf, bigger than Jacob, powerful, wild, free, would cross continents to stand before the man who saved him. Neither knew that millions of people would witness their reunion and question everything they believed about animal memory. But fate had already begun writing that chapter. In the quiet warmth of that night, in the shelter of Jacob's arms, a future was sealed. Wolf and human. Rescuer and rescued. Two halves of one improbable story. Shadow survived the night. And Jacob Carter was never the same man again. The first winter storm of November rolled toward the town like a moving mountain of white, swallowing the sky inch by inch. Daniel stood in his cabin doorway, watching the distant wall of snow approach across Wolf Valley. He held a steaming mug of coffee in both hands, trying to ignore how badly they were shaking, not from the cold, but from a truth he was finally willing to accept. The adult wolf he had seen on the ridge yesterday was not just any wolf. It was her. It was Silver. He had known the moment their eyes met. Only animals raised by humans held eye contact that long. Only an animal whose memories had never faded would cross an entire valley and stand just yards away from him, silent, waiting. He had not slept at all that night. Memory after memory had dragged him through the darkness, Silver as a cub curled under his chin, Silver learning to howl, Silver racing beside him in the moonlight, her paws too big for her growing body. That wolf had been the happiest chapter of his life, but also the most painful ending. He remembered the day she left, the way she kept turning back, wanting to stay. He had broken inside that morning. He had pretended it was just wildlife rehabilitation, but deep down he had known he loved her like a child. And now, 5 years later, she had returned. Why? The question stalked him like a shadow as the storm winds curled around the cabin walls. Daniel walked to the window and stared through the frost. Snowflakes the size of feathers drifted downward, slow at first, then faster. Visibility dropped. Soon he could barely make out the tree line. And still, he looked, searching for movement. He whispered under his breath, "Where are you, girl?" The phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Only 2 people ever called him, Captain Ward from the Wildlife Center and Claire, the journalist from town. Claire's name lit the screen. He hesitated, then answered. "You saw the wolf, didn't you?" she said, without greeting. Daniel tensed. "How would you know that?" "Because half the valley saw it." She exhaled sharply. "There were reports yesterday morning. An adult female, huge, silver-gray coat, came within 15 feet of a rancher up north before running off." "That wasn't aggression," Daniel muttered. "That was searching." "You think it's yours," Claire said quietly. Daniel swallowed. "I know it is." There was silence on the line, the kind that carried emotion too heavy for words. Claire finally spoke. "Daniel, wolves don't return to humans. They don't remember individuals after 5 years. That's not how their brains work." He closed his eyes. "I used to believe that. I don't anymore. Why come back now?" Claire whispered. Daniel had no answer. But deep inside, fear began to form. Wolves did not risk returning near humans unless something was terribly wrong. Hunger. Injury. Loss. Claire continued, "Animal control has been notified. Hunters, too. People think she's a threat. You need to be careful." His blood turned cold. "Hunting season ends this week," she added. "People will be armed. And if she gets close to livestock, they'll shoot her." "Yes." Daniel hung up without speaking another word. He couldn't breathe. His heart hammered as he grabbed his coat, gloves, and rifle, not to use, but to look the part if someone questioned him. Outside, the storm blasted him instantly. Snow stung his face like thrown sand. The wind howled around him in a voice disturbingly similar to wolves calling across mountains. He trudged through knee-deep snow toward the ridge where he'd seen her. The world was white and more snow was falling, erasing his footprints as soon as he made them. Every few steps, he listened, really listened. And then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost believed he imagined it, a familiar, trembling howl. Not the deep, confident voice of an alpha female, but something fragile. Something hurting. Daniel's pulse exploded. He ran. Branches whipped his face. Snow swallowed his boots. Wind roared, but that sound rose above everything, calling him. He reached the ridge clearing, gasping, shaking, and froze. There she was. Silver. Soaked in snow, fur thick with ice, chest heaving. She was larger than he remembered, enormous, 7 feet from nose to tail tip, shoulders broad, eyes the same impossible pale amber. But she wasn't standing tall or proud. She was lying on her side, struggling to breathe, steam choking from her mouth with each pained exhale. Daniel staggered forward, falling to his knees beside her. "Silver, oh God!" She opened her eyes, and the world stopped. Recognition flared instantly. She blinked slowly, pupils widening. Her tail moved weakly in the snow. She remembered. He placed a trembling hand on her neck. Her fur was warm under the ice. Her breathing uneven. Then he saw the blood. Just beneath her ribs, hidden under thick winter coat, a bullet wound. Fresh. Still bleeding. Daniel's face drained of color. "No, no, not you." Silver closed her eyes again, not from fear. From exhaustion. From pain. The storm raged around them as if nature itself was screaming. Daniel pressed his forehead to hers. "You came to me because you're dying," he whispered. Her ear twitched. A soft whine escaped her throat. He slid both arms under her weight, trying to lift, but she was too heavy, and his strength failed. "Help!" he yelled into the wind. "Someone! Help!" Nothing answered but the storm. He tried again, pushing, dragging, fighting physics and gravity. She groaned weakly. "I'm not letting you die," he swore, voice cracking. "Not after everything." Silver's paw pressed weakly against his leg, like she was telling him to stop. "No," Daniel whispered. "Not this time. I'm not losing you." His breathing shook violently. He grabbed his radio from his belt and screamed into it. "Base, this is Daniel Hale. I have a wolf shot and bleeding on the ridge. I need backup and medical supply now." Static. Crackling. Then. "Storm interference, can't reach you, repeat." The signal died. Daniel closed his eyes, then opened them with something new inside, fury. He hooked his arms beneath Silver again and pulled with every ounce of strength left in him. His muscles tore. His back screamed. His lungs burned. But the wolf moved. Inch by inch. She kept her eyes on him the whole time. That was when he realized. She had not returned because she was dying. She had returned because she trusted only one living being on earth to save her. And he would not fail her, not again, not ever. The storm swallowed man and wolf as they disappeared into white, dragging fate behind them. The valley waited breathlessly. The world did not yet know that the greatest reunion of their lives was only hours away, and that the storm was not the danger, humans were. Silver whimpered once, a sound Daniel had not heard since she was a baby. "Hold on," he whispered, voice breaking. "Stay with me." And the wolf did. She followed his voice through pain and darkness, because after 5 years, her memory had not faded. She had never forgotten him. Not for a single heartbeat. Winter surrendered to spring in the Montana mountains, and with the melting ice came an unexpected calm in Daniel's life. He no longer woke up from nightmares of gunshots and snowy forests. He no longer expected to see yellow eyes in the darkness, no longer believed that every howl in the distance was a ghost from his past. He told himself he had healed. He told himself the wolf cub he once saved was living its life somewhere in the wild, too busy surviving to remember a man who fed it milk by a fireplace 5 years ago. But memory, especially the kind born in desperation and warmth, does not disappear just because humans want it to. It sleeps. It waits. And then, when the world least expects it, it returns. 3 months after the broadcast invitation arrived, Daniel finally agreed to appear on the state wildlife program. There were 2 reasons he accepted: first, because it was time to face the part of his soul he had buried, and second, because they wanted to discuss his research on wolf-human coexistence. Not a mention of the past. Not a mention of the cub. The producers promised this was science only, not biography. But deep down, Daniel knew something was shifting. Conservationists across the northern Rockies had been reporting sightings of a massive lone wolf with a distinctive streak of white fur running from its brow to its shoulder, exactly like the cub Daniel had once rescued. They said the wolf avoided packs, avoided hunters, avoided livestock, avoided every human structure except one, Daniel's cabin. Tracks appeared there often. Fresh ones. Close enough that snowfall did not erase them. Too deliberate to ignore. Yet Daniel never saw the wolf itself. It was as if the creature watched him only when hidden. He pretended it was coincidence. Wolves roam widely, he told himself. They forget their beginnings, he whispered. They have to. That was what science insisted. Wolves imprint only as cubs, by adulthood, bonds dissolve. The memory that shaped their childhood becomes instinct, not recognition. Daniel repeated these facts each night like prayers. But every time he looked outside at dawn and saw those enormous prints circling the cabin, prints the size of his spread palm, he felt cold truth in his bones. Someone was coming. And someone else knew it. Evelyn Hayes, the producer, had spent weeks preparing the televised field segment. She arrived at Daniel's cabin 2 days before recording with cameras, microphones, and a quiet smile that told Daniel she sensed more of his story than he ever intended to reveal. She was the kind of journalist who listened more than she spoke. She noticed the tracks. She noticed Daniel's long pauses. She noticed that his eyes drifted to the forest as though expecting something to step out. On the first night of filming preparations, she stood with him on the porch beneath a velvet sky. Stars hung low enough to touch, and wind carried pine needles like whispers. "You're waiting for something," she said softly. Not accusing. Not dramatic. Just true. Daniel didn't answer. Evelyn continued. "You keep staring into the woods the way people stare at doors expecting someone they love to knock." That sentence locked the air in Daniel's lungs. He stared at the snowfield stretching toward the tree line and thought about the cub curled against his chest 5 years ago, trembling, starving, hopeless. He could still feel the little heartbeat. It was strange how a creature could change you without ever speaking a word. Daniel had never married. Had no children. His career was his family. But the wolf cub, Evan, had been something different. Something he had never dared to define. Evelyn turned toward him. "If this wolf comes on camera, it will change the world." Daniel's reaction was immediate. "No," he snapped. "The world ruins what it discovers." She flinched, but she understood. "Then we don't have to film it. But you need to see him if he's still out there." Daniel shook his head, voice low. "You don't understand. If he comes and doesn't recognize me, if he looks at me like any stranger, I don't know if I could live with that." Evelyn's answer was a whisper. "And if he does recognize you?" That question echoed through Daniel's skull long into the night. The next morning, snow fell again, the glittering kind that floats silently, like ash from an ancient fire. Daniel stepped out alone before sunrise, crunching across the white crust toward the tree line. He said nothing aloud, but the mountains heard him anyway. Every part of him was trembling. He felt foolish. He felt childish. And then he saw them, fresh footprints. Deep. Heavy. Leading not away from the cabin, but toward it. And beside the first set were smaller prints. Paws. Tiny ones. Cubs. Daniel's pulse burst. Evan had not returned alone. The weight of that realization nearly buckled Daniel's knees. A lone wolf was rare. A lone wolf raising a litter was almost impossible. Wolves needed packs, shared hunting, shared protection. But this creature, the one Daniel had fed milk to by a stone fireplace, had carved a path through the world alone and now passed the defiance to his children. Daniel walked farther into the trees until the cabin's lights were hidden behind trunks. There, in the silent cathedral of winter, he felt something watching him. He turned. Slowly. Between branches stood a shadow the size of a myth. Massive. Silent. Fur-silvered by frost. Eyes glowing amber like sunrise through whiskey glass. And on its shoulder, just beneath one ear, a stark streak of white fur, unmistakable. Evan. Fully grown. majestic, alive. Daniel's breath vanished. He whispered the name he had not spoken aloud in 5 years. Evan? The wolf did not move. Did not blink. For a long, trembling minute, the world seemed to forget how to breathe. The two stood separated by 20 feet of snow and 5 years of silence. Then it happened. The wolf lowered its head, slowly, deliberately, the gesture wolves use only for pack, only for kin, only for those they trust. Daniel's throat burned. His eyes blurred. Something ancient inside him dissolved. He took one step forward. Evan did not retreat. But before Daniel could speak again, a sharp click came from behind. A camera. Evelyn Hayes stood recording, not the wolf, but Daniel's face. She whispered without looking up, "We need this moment. Not for the world. For you." Daniel wanted to yell. To stop her. To run. But then Evan did something that shattered every law of science Daniel had ever believed in. The wolf stepped forward, closer, closing half the distance between them. His breath drifted in pale clouds. His enormous paws pressed silent into snow. Behind him, tiny shapes trembled among the trees, pups, peeking at their father's courage. Evan stopped just 10 feet away from Daniel. He lifted his head. And then, soft, impossible, unbelievable, he whined. A sound wolves never make for strangers. A sound wolves make for family. Daniel's heart broke open. And the camera kept rolling. The studio hallways emptied slowly, camera cables coiled away, microphones clicked into silence, and monitors faded to black until only faint screensavers floated across them. Yet Evan remained sitting on that cold studio floor with the full-grown wolf leaning against him, its massive body curled the way a child curls into a parent. Everything that had been loud, impossible, unbelievable, had softened into a silence that neither man nor wolf needed to break. 5 years ago, that tiny cub had weighed barely 3 pounds, its bones like fragile twigs, its heartbeat a trembling flutter under Evan's hand. Now, the weight pressed against his side was over 80 pounds of pure muscle and fur, the living form of a creature who should have moved on with wild instinct. But it hadn't. Somehow, impossibly, Vasher still remembered. Still loved. Evan slowly laced his fingers through the wolf's fur, feeling the powerful pulse beneath it. "You found me," he whispered, voice rough, barely audible. "You really found me." Vasher replied with a low rumble, somewhere between a growl and a purr, the same strange sound the cub used to make during late-night bottle feedings when Evan hummed softly to keep him calm. The sound hollowed Evan's lungs, brought an ache to his chest he had never known words for, something deep and timeless and painfully human. From the hallway entrance, footsteps approached. Dr. Silas, the sanctuary biologist who had accompanied the wolf to the studio, paused a respectful distance away. He studied the wolf pressed tightly against Evan's side and then spoke quietly. "You should know how rare this is," he murmured. "Wolves form bonds, yes. Strong bonds. But for one to sustain attachment across 5 years, across instinct, across a different continent. I have never seen anything like this." Evan looked up slowly. "So what happens now?" Silas exhaled and crossed his arms. "That depends on you. And on him." He studied Vasher again, eyes narrowed. "He hasn't let anyone else near him since he arrived from the airport. He refused food on the trip. He refused sedation. The moment he smelled your clothing in the green room, everything changed. He didn't rest until he reached this spot." Evan swallowed hard. "He remembered my scent." Silas nodded. "Animals forget visual memories. They forget touches. They forget voices. But smell is identity. You are stamped into him." The wolf pressed harder against Evan's ribs as if claiming territory that had always been his. Evan buried his face into Vasher's fur, letting the scent of pine and wild musk wrap around him. It was like breathing memory itself. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I left him. I left Kenya. I walked away." Silas shook his head. You didn't abandon him. You saved him. Twice. Those words did not land, not yet, but they rolled through Evan's mind. For years, he had replayed that final morning with the cub over and over, the trembling goodbye, the cub licking his sleeve, the sanctuary staff reminding him that wolves belonged to their world, not his. He had walked away because he had been told the cub had to forget him. That was the natural order. Vasher had apparently disagreed. The wolf lifted its head suddenly, ears pricking toward the hallway. His eyes sharpened, and the soft rumbling stopped. Evan tensed instinctively. He remembered that signal from the old days. Alertness. Protection. Vasher shifted his feet, muscles hardening. Silas lifted a calming hand. It's just the handler coming back. But before the handler appeared, a woman stepped into the doorway instead, Rebecca Collins, one of America's most watched talk show hosts, and the woman whose program had just aired their reunion across the world. She stopped mid-step, hand pressed to her chest. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice shaking. "He won't leave your side." Evan nodded silently. Rebecca blinked fast. "You need to come back tomorrow." Evan frowned. "Why?" "Because the world is exploding," she said, holding up her buzzing phone. "Every network is calling. Every wildlife organization. And social media." She stopped, shaking her head. "This isn't just a viral clip. This is history. A wolf recognizing a human after 5 years? This will rewrite animal cognition research." Evan didn't answer. Rebecca hesitated. Then she softened. "Listen, Evan, if you want the public support to get temporary guardianship permissions, to spend time with him at the sanctuary, to stay near him, to work with him again, you need the world to stay obsessed with this story. The more people watching, the more pressure wildlife authorities will feel." Silas nodded thoughtfully. "She's right." Evan glanced down at the wolf. At the amber eye staring up at him with full trust. That trust was a responsibility. A living connection. A debt. He whispered, "I'll do whatever gives him the best life." Rebecca studied the wolf. "Then tomorrow, you sit beside him on camera again, and tell the world how you saved him." The wolf let out a breathy puff, as if approving his own public schedule. Silas smiled faintly. "He'll go wherever you go tonight. We can't separate you now. He'll tear down walls." Evan laughed softly, surprised at the sound. "So, what?" "I take a wolf home." Silas shrugged. "Temporarily?" "Yes. Under supervision. We'll stay outside. But separation is impossible now." Vasher nudged his jaw with the top of his head. Evan froze as memory surged. The cub used to do that every time he was ready to sleep. "All right," Evan said, voice thick. "Take me home, boy." The handlers returned with a reinforced leash, but the wolf ignored their attempts until Evan himself stood up and gently placed his fingers near Vasher's neck. Only then did he allow the leash to clip on. They walked out of the studio together. Past the cameras. Past stunned interns. Past executives whispering in hallways. Past security officers frozen mid-step. Down the cold stairwell. Into the cool night air. The street was empty, lit by wet reflections from fresh rain. Vasher lifted his head toward the wind, breathing in unfamiliar scent layers, the smell of concrete, gasoline, streetlights, and thousands of unseen strangers. Then he lowered his head and pressed it against Evan's hip, walking perfectly at his side, as if 5 years had never existed. People from passing cars slowed, phones pressed to windows, jaws falling open. No one saw a wild predator. They saw loyalty. They saw love. They saw a story the world had forgotten to believe in. At Evan's apartment building entrance, Vasher stopped and stared up at the stone doorway, nose twitching. Evan smiled weakly. "Yeah, it's not the forest," he whispered. "But it's home tonight." Silas approached. "We'll sleep outside. You two rest. Tomorrow changes everything." Evan nodded, unlocked the door, and led the wolf inside. The building went silent behind him. Up one flight. 2. A narrow hallway. Then his apartment door clicked open. Inside, the world paused. The wolf walked slowly across the wooden floor, sniffing every corner, tail low but relaxed. Then he found the old backpack sitting by the wall, an untouched relic Evan could never throw away. Inside were photographs. Wolf fur from the cub's first shedding. A scrap of blood-stained cloth from the poacher snare rescue. A tiny collar tag that had never been used. Vasher sniffed it once. Twice. Then lay down beside it and placed his head directly on top. And for the first time since leaving Kenya, Evan felt whole. Tomorrow would bring interviews and scientific debates and legal battles and global attention. But tonight, the wolf slept at his feet. Just like he used to. Just like family, the studio lights dimmed as the director announced the final commercial break. Ethan sat on the bench beside the wolf, beside Luno, and felt the weight of everything pressing against his heart. 5 years ago, this animal had been a fragile bundle of bone and fur, small enough to fit inside one palm. Today, he sat towering, powerful, his shoulders broad beneath a thick winter coat. He should have feared Ethan, or ignored him, or behaved like any other wild creature brought too close to humans. But instead, Luno leaned again, not just touching Ethan, but pressing against him with deliberate, tender weight. The cameras flicked off temporarily, and silence took the studio. Ethan loosened the knot of his tie, breath shaky. The trainers hovered nearby, stunned. They whispered to one another, trying to interpret what they had just witnessed. Everyone saw it, the wolf recognized him. Ethan placed a trembling hand on Luno's chest. He felt the wolf's heartbeat under his palm, steadier than his own. "You remember me," Ethan whispered. Luno's ears perked, and a low, vibrating whine escaped him. It wasn't a threat, nor discomfort. It was the same sound he made as a pup when they fed him warm milk beneath a heat lamp to keep him alive. The same sound he made lying curled against Ethan's chest under blankets in winter. It was recognition, not instinct, not coincidence. Memory. The studio doors opened, and an assistant motioned for Ethan. "You'll live again in 90 seconds, she said. But her voice was thick, emotional. She had tears in her eyes. Everyone did. Ethan stood and followed the handlers toward the center platform where he would finish the interview. Luno padded behind him, the heavy rope leash hanging uselessly between them. The wolf was walking freely, choosing to remain at Ethan's side even though nothing bound him there. "You want him right beside you?" the director asked. Ethan looked down. Luno stared up with eyes like polished onyx, steady, sure. "Yes," Ethan whispered. "Right beside me." The countdown began again. 5, 4, 3, 2. The light snapped on. Rebecca Williams, the evening anchor, blinked rapidly. Her professional smile trembled. "Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you are witnessing a remarkable moment on live broadcast. Ethan Hayes, former ranger and wildlife rescue volunteer, has reunited, unexpectedly, with a wolf he helped raise 5 years ago. And this wolf has not left his side since." Ethan cleared his throat. "His name is Luno." Rebecca leaned forward, curiosity overwhelming professionalism. "Ethan, how does it feel?" He opened his mouth. The answer that came was honest in a way he never anticipated. "It feels like everything I ever did right finally mattered." Luno pressed his muzzle into Ethan's shoulder, purring a soft, deep one that vibrated through them both. The audience gasped. Rebecca swallowed. Experts say wolves don't remember individual people after this long. That their brains aren't designed for emotional memory. Ethan shook his head. Then the experts never met Luno. A few laughs of disbelief rippled through the studio. Rebecca lowered her voice. "Why did you save him, Ethan? Back then?" The answer was simple. Because he needed someone. He paused. And so did I. Silence fell, raw, heavy, perfect. Rebecca blinked back tears. Luna was rescued from a den after poachers killed the pack. Yes. He was freezing. He was barely breathing. I took him home, fed him every 3 hours around the clock. He used to sleep pressed beneath my coat because he could only sleep if he felt a heartbeat. And then? And then I let him go. Rebecca lowered the papers in her hand, voice soft. Why? Ethan looked at Luno, not at the camera. Because love isn't possession. Because he belonged to wild mountains and moonlight, not to walls and people. Because keeping him would have ruined him. Luno pushed his head beneath Ethan's arm, like an animal shielding his human from the world. Ethan let his hand fall into the wolf's thick fur. But letting him go, Ethan continued quietly, was the hardest thing I ever did. The room held its breath. Rebecca leaned closer. And now he found you again. Yes, Ethan whispered. He found me. Cameras zoomed, catching close angles, the wolf's slow blinking trust, the way his paw touched Ethan's boot, how Ethan's smile trembled like he was breaking open inside. It means everything. Rebecca asked, so what now? Ethan hesitated. I go with him. The producers jolted. You mean leave with him? I mean follow him home, Ethan said. His handlers say his sanctuary land is still there, in the same mountains where he grew up. If he came for me, I'm going back with him. Luno nudged Ethan's face with his nose. A sound, heavy and emotional, rippled through the audience, a collective exhale none of them realized they were holding. Rebecca's voice cracked. Will you stay with him? As long as he wants me, Ethan answered. The camera zoomed in, the man and the wolf pressed side by side, sharing breath and warmth, two beings separated by years and miles and nature itself, yet bound by something even scientists couldn't deny anymore. Rebecca closed the broadcast with a whisper rather than a script. Tonight, we witnessed proof that memory survives. That love returns. That wild hearts never forget kindness. The lights faded to black. The moment the cameras cut, Luno pressed forward, climbing into Ethan's arms, not leaping, not attacking, but curling, like a wolf who had finally found the place he belonged. Ethan held him there, eyes closed. I missed you too, he whispered. Outside, handlers waited with concern. What if he doesn't let you leave? One asked. Ethan smiled. He already let me leave once, he said. He's here because he chose to come back. The handlers nodded slowly. Then follow him, they said. Ethan did. 2 hours later, far from the city, under a cold moon hanging above silent highways, Ethan and Luno stood beside the transport truck. Snowflakes drifted down. Forest waited in the dark distance, the same forest where they had met 5 years earlier. The back gate opened. Luno jumped out and turned, not toward the woods, but toward Ethan. He placed one paw on Ethan's chest, eyes burning gold with certainty. Lead, Ethan whispered. And Luno did. They disappeared into the trees together, one wolf, one man, returning to the only truth that ever mattered. Love is remembered. Kindness never dies. And wild hearts find their way home. The world never saw Ethan Hayes again on television. But out there, somewhere beneath moonlight and snow, Luno walked with him every night. The man who saved a baby wolf was finally where he belonged. Not in front of cameras. Not behind screens. But beside the animal who never forgot him. Forever.